Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Blu-ray Boutique. I'm your co-host, Rosalie Lewis.
And I'm your other co-host, Tim Rosenberger.
And this week on the show, I'm excited for this topic because it gave me an excuse to dive into movies I hadn't seen before from an actor whose work I admire, and that is the early films of Al Pacino. So I know, Tim, you chose this topic, and I'd love to hear from you. What was it about these two movies that we're going to be talking about, or what is it about Al Pacino that made you want to pick this topic?
Honestly, it was because I had seen one of the films that we're going to be, one of the two films we're going to be talking about. So we're going to be talking about Panic in Needle Park and Scarecrow. And I had seen Panic in Needle Park, I don't know, two maybe three times before, and I really admired the film. And so it was partially an excuse to rewatch that. But also, I had a copy of Scarecrow for quite some time, so it was an excuse to watch that for the first time. But also, I just think it's interesting that two of the earliest films that he did that are not like The Godfather or Serpico or Dog Day Afternoon or whatever, and they tend to get kind of ignored, but not as much Panic Needle Park for reasons that I'm sure we'll get into, but especially Scarecrow, they just aren't talked about very often, so I thought it would be cool to highlight them here.
Yeah, and they just so happen to be both directed by Jerry Schatzberg, so
Yeah,
that's
which I
an
didn't even notice until Scarecrow started it. That was totally accidental on my
yeah.
part.
Well, it worked out well. So, in thinking about Al Pacino overall, do you have a particular relationship with him or his movies? Like, is there a particular performance that came to mind before these movies that you were like, this is kind of when I think of Al Pacino, this is what I think of?
I mean, like a lot of people, it's probably The Godfather. I mean, it's such a great movie and it's such a great performance.
Yeah, I'd be curious what people that are a little younger than us think of when they think of Al Pacino, because up until The Irishman, he had kind of a spate of not so great movies that he appeared in. I mean, you've got, Manglehorn and Geely and, a couple of Adam Sandler joints, 88 Minutes, like movies that I can't imagine are the best of his career. When I think of him, I definitely think of other things like, for me, Dog Day Afternoon is probably my favorite. And then I also really love him in Sea of Love, which is a movie I actually only watched, I think, last year for the first time, but I was really struck by it. And, he plays a very compelling character, whether he's playing a good guy or a bad guy. He carries so much in the eyes and in the face that if you've only seen kind of the stereotypical, like, hoo-ah, whatever performances, it might be hard to imagine that, this really weathered face that we are used to seeing really carried so much emotion back even in his first one or two performances. So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting for us to kind of talk about that.
Well, I think even I mean, obviously, there's a lot of jokes about Al Pacino and his changing acting styles and how in his later part of his career he's almost more caricatured himself and stuff, not as badly in stuff like when he's in stuff that's still good like The Irishman or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or whatever, but yeah, he has kind of become almost a parody of himself in some cases, and I think and we will get into this, he's certainly less shouty in his early career than he is later on when he gets kind of more overblown and stuff, but even with his later career being what it is and being more spotty and stuff, and there's always something I think compelling about him, and there's always, even if he's doing something bad, I still think he is enjoying what he's doing, and I still sense a passion in acting in what he's doing, so I can never, even if he's doing something horrible, I can't really get too annoyed with him because I could still sense that he's loving his job. So
Well, and I can't fault the man for having a few bad apples among the bunch. He's been acting for over 50 years, if my
yes.
math is correct. So there's bound to be a few stinkers in there, but he's made a lot of really great films too, and it
Mm-hmm.
was fun to go back and discover these two early gems. So the very first one that we're going to be talking about today is The Panic in Needle Park, and this was directed, as we mentioned, by Jerry Schatzberg in 1971. It's funny because Wikipedia describes it as a romantic drama,
Eh,
I don't know that that completely captures the essence that I got out of it, but we can get into that
yeah,
later.
we will.
So it's based on a book by James Mills,
Right.
and I believe the book actually was sort of based on a true story or a pictorial of, heroin addicts that were in and around this area of New York that was referred to as Needle Park. It was where people went to score drugs, basically, and specifically heroin. And it follows Al Pacino's character, or who is named Bobby. And Bobby is very charismatic, but he's also kind of bad news. And he falls in love with Helen, who's portrayed by Kitty Wynn, and she sticks with him for better and worse. And she also ends up becoming an addict. And the movie is, I would say, pretty painful at times to watch, just to see the downfall of these two people, but also all the other folks that they kind of run into and the desperation that comes through as they're just looking for their next fix. So
Hmm.
I know you mentioned you've seen this a few times. When I was watching, I was like, well, I think this will probably be the only time I can actually sit through this because it's so tough to watch. But what has drawn you to this movie, and what about it really speaks to you?
Well, and I get that because when I first did the hard to watch thing, because when I first watched it, it was funny because it was Panic Needle Park was one of the few times where I felt like watching something on Netflix, and Netflix actually had it. Because usually it's like, oh, I want to watch this, oh, it doesn't have it anymore. Oh, I want to watch this, oh, it doesn't have it anymore. But I wanted to watch it one day. It was oh God, it was a few years ago. I think near the end of grad school, I think, and maybe even right when I finished. But anyway, I was kind of moved to watch it because I had heard about it, and it should be mentioned this was before I forget. This was Al Pacino's first starring role in a movie. He had a supporting role in a film from 1969 called Me, Natalie, which starred oh God. Anyway, he has a supporting role in that. I don't know how big it was, but this was his first. What? Patty Duke.
Hattie D.
Yes. Sorry, Patty Duke and Patty Duke fans. Anyway, he had a supporting role in that. I don't know how big it was. I don't know if that film's even that available. I'd be curious to see it. But anyway, this was his first leading role in a movie, and I was curious partially for that, just to watch it because of that. And I checked it out, and I was worried that it was going to be very depressing, and it was going to
Mm-hmm.
depress me and stuff. But oddly enough, it didn't. And the other one or two times I had watched it before this one, it really wasn't. I really didn't find it depressing.
Well, you may not have been depressed by the movie, but I will say it definitely wasn't super cheerful.
Yeah.
At least when I watched it, I had expected it to be a bit of a downer. It's definitely a downer. I've seen, Requiem for a Dream, and to me, this was much more harrowing because it felt more realistic. I love that, it really doesn't try to dramatize too much. I mean, there's drama in it, but there's no score, so it doesn't, amp up your emotions that way. There's not a lot of like flashy camera work. It's just it has that like cinema verite feel to it where you almost feel like you're watching a documentary. And I can't tell for sure, but there's a shot where somebody is shooting up in close up, and I don't know if they used a stunt arm or what, but it looks pretty realistic. So
I think all the stuff where they're shooting, they are actually. I mean, obviously they're not. I would hope they're not shooting heroin into themselves, but they're shooting. They are injecting needles into themselves. But they had a nurse on hand apparently on the set to help, keep things safe and junk. I don't know what they were using as a substitute liquid, but yeah, they are shooting themselves up.
Okay. Yeah, that it definitely looked real, so I guess that explains it. I was not really familiar with Kitty Wynn, but I thought she was very compelling, and she starts out being a fairly, sad sack kind of character. She's just had an abortion that went wrong, and she's, in the hospital for the after effects of that, and then, she meets Bobby, who shows her a little bit of kindness, and that appears to be all that she's looking for, really. So he takes her under his wing, and the two really do have like a sweet early courtship, I guess I would say, although things quickly take a turn. And she should probably know she's in for trouble when, on their way back to his apartment the first time, he steals a TV for her and then like pawns it for drug money. So I think that was the first sign of bad things to come for her. But she sticks with it. And, for me, I think that was maybe the toughest thing about this movie for me was like understanding her character, because it's very hard to imagine why someone would knowingly walk into that situation, even though it is Al Pacino, but knowingly walk into that situation and stay with this guy that has such a horrible problem, and then kind of get caught up in it herself.
Is probably somebody with very low self-esteem and just very, I think, very lonely, and so it's not hard for her maybe to get into to Bobby. I do think when we talked about you questioned the selling of the movie, and I do agree with that. I think while there is, I think, some sort of warmth to the relationship to an extent, I think to an extent they care about each other. They're just very obviously, at least in this state, maybe if they both cleaned up, it would be a different story. But at least in this state, I mean, they're just very not healthy for each other, and it's quite a toxic relationship. They don't really make each other better and stuff. And I think I don't know, I thought a little bit, because I have seen the tagline to one of the posters. I forget what it was, but it was drugs, 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 but they find love in Needle Park or whatever it is. And I kind of thought about it when I thought that kind of thing on one of the posters. I kind of thought back to something like Gone with the Wind, where it's kind of often kind of, I mean, that especially is kind of touted as this great romance and stuff, but it's a really unhealthy romance, and I don't think something that really should be sold as a good thing. And I think both of these kind of, even though I think maybe the filmmakers of both those films knew what they were doing in terms of their relationships and stuff, but I think maybe the films are maybe too often sold as these romances are kind of these characters' salvations and stuff, which isn't really, if anything, that's kind of almost their doom in some cases. So yeah, I really wouldn't. I wouldn't say it's a romance. There's a couple in it that gets very volatile and very just angry, and Al Pacino's character Bobby has some real anger management issues.
You've been piddling your ass all over the West Side!
You don't understand.
Give me that shit! You've been pushing, you've been shooting, you've been selling! Huh? I was gonna marry you! And I was gonna marry a whore! You know that? I was gonna marry a whore! You're a whore! Open the door! Open the door, hell, I'll break it down! Open that door! Ellie, open the door, I'll break it down!
Yeah, not a healthy thing, and not something you should watch with your significant other.
Yeah, I did watch it with my significant other who had seen it before, so we kind of knew what to expect. But he was saying that this is a movie that was not really like well loved at the time, but it had a cult following, and like Andy Warhol apparently was a really big fan of this movie, which I found really interesting. I imagine that he knew people or could relate to some of the materials. Since
Andy Warhol being related to drugs, I don't.
I know, what are we
you.
talking about? How could that be?
One of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this film, besides the fact that I like it, is that usually when I see this film mentioned, when they're interviewing Al Pacino or doing a whatever on his career or whatever, it is usually mentioned for two reasons. One, the reason I already mentioned, that it was his first starring role in a film, and two, it helped him get the role of Michael in The Godfather, where the studio really didn't want him for The Godfather. Francis Ford Coppola did. He showed them, like, I think Al Pacino said, like, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes of Panic in Needle Park. They liked that enough to hire him for The Godfather. But those are the two reasons why this film is usually mentioned. So I really wanted to kind of get past that to a certain extent and really talk about it as a film, because I think it's a film that is worth talking about. I mean, it certainly gives you an idea of a little bit of a window into the drug scene in this little section, or maybe even a bigger or New York as a whole in the early 1970s. And like you said, it really, I think you mentioned there was no score for the film. They had actually had composed, and I think maybe even recorded a score for the film, which you can find on the Twilight Time DVD Blu-ray for the film. I don't know if you can listen to it without a commentary. I think it's isolated score track. But anyway.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, there was a score that was composed for the film, and they took it out, which I think was a good idea, because I really can't imagine a score for this film at all. I think it would have been inappropriate, because like you said, it is so almost documentary-like and real and stuff. I think it would have been wrong to impose an artificial element in it like that. And I think, when I was reading up about the film after the last time I watched it, I actually had noticed there's not only is there no score or anything for it, there's no music in the movie at all. And I think that really helps sell the bleakness of these people's lives. And one of the things I do like about the film, if you could say this is a thing I would like, is that it does a very good job of showing that these people, not just Bobby and Helen, but all these people they hang out with, they really have no lives outside
Right.
of doing illegal things and doing drugs, which illegal things are almost done more for, especially in Al Pacino's case, more just done so they can get more drugs.
Yep.
And I know that mixed with no score or no music at all, and mixed with the fact that they tried to, I think, pull a lot of the color out of the film, so it just looked pretty drab. I think all that stuff make it a film that should be really talked about beyond just, oh, it was his first leading role in a movie.
Well, and it's interesting too because I was reading that apparently they originally were thinking about having Jim Morrison of The Doors star in the movie. Like they
Huh.
talked to him about it,
Huh.
and he turned it down. And I can't imagine what that would have been like.
That would have been very different.
Very different. But also, Jerry Schatzberg also initially turned it down, and his agent had to talk him back into it. But he said, at first it just didn't feel right. He said he had a lot of friends that died from doing drugs, and so, he really wasn't sure. But he said that, his agent convinced him because his agent was also managing Al Pacino and was like, well, Al is interested, so, maybe you should do it. And eventually he rethought and reread and decided to go for it, and it ended up being recognized at the Cannes Film Festival. I don't think it won, but it was certainly recognized and got a good reception there. So.
Well, yeah, and and imagine if Jim Morrison had done it, Al Pacino wouldn't have. Just for the fact that if Al Pacino hadn't done the movie, he probably wouldn't have done The Godfather, and his
Right.
entire career would have been
Completely different.
different. It would have been unless Francis Ford Coppola had found some other way to get Al Pacino in the movie. Though I don't know how he got noticed. Al Pacino, it might have been through Panic in Needle Park for all I know. But so yeah, it's really weird how that stuff can turn out.
Right. It all comes together. And imagine what if Jim Morrison had ended up getting the role in The Godfather, which I highly
That
doubt. But
no, well, especially since I don't think he and Marlon Brando would have survived each other. I think there were
no, probably.
two big egos that would have destroyed each other.
Oh man, but imagine the behind the scenes documentaries we would have gotten.
Yes, but okay, yeah, that'd be very very odd. Jim Morrison starts dating Diane Keaton, and just Jim Morrison in his life. Jim Morrison's still alive. He stars in The Irishman as Jimmy Hoffa.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
The
The
weird
whole
things.
world would be different.
God. Anyway,
Tim,
um,
I realize.
yeah, let's talk about Kitty Wynn a little bit because she didn't. She's still alive. She retired from acting, I think, when she became a mom and stuff, and she decided to quit. And just for the most part, she's done some stuff here and there. Like she did, I think, a play in 2011 or something like that. But the most part, she's just been retired for. So she didn't do many films. I think she. Oh, I think she was in. Was she the mother in The Exorcist?
Yeah, that sounds right.
I
I've
think she
only
was.
seen that movie one time.
Yeah, I
To
think
my
she was. Yeah, I think she was in the first two Exorcist movies, and I think besides this film, that's probably her biggest claims to fame movie-wise. But it's sad that she didn't do more stuff. I would have been interested to see her. I don't know her filmography terribly well, but it would be interesting, especially to see her in lighter stuff. That's not as.
Mhm.
That's where she can be happy a little bit in her character. But she is a very good actress in this, and I think, and really, this is an Al Pacino centric episode, but really this is, if it's anybody's movie, it's really more Kitty's movie than it is Bobby's movie, because you see almost the entire movie from her point of view, and it's really about her relationship with him and Junk. So yeah, just a really solid actress, really, and I think it would have been very interesting to see her kind of in more films and get more kind of love and attention, because I think she's unfortunately rather forgotten, and even in terms of 1970s cinema.
Right. Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to go back and watch The Exorcist if for nothing else than just to see her in it because I hadn't made that connection until I was looking it up. But she is really good as this character that otherwise, like I said, is a little hard to sympathize with because she makes these kind of irrational decisions about sticking around when Bobby is, using and desperate and using her to score and all this other stuff. And she portrays really well because her character is supposedly originally from, I think, Indiana, Fort Wayne, Indiana. And she portrays really well this person who has some shreds of innocence left, but she's also just really like tired and downtrodden. And so when she does try heroin for the first time and you're screaming at the TV like, no, don't do it, you also kind of feel like, what else is her life about? Because it seems like she's out in New York on her own, trying to figure things out. She has a failed relationship. She's an artist, but there's not a lot of money in that. She really can't hold down a job. So I do think that through her portrayal, she's able to kind of convey why somebody might turn to something
Yeah.
so extreme.
Yeah, and I think, and it's obvious that her family, I think, still, I mean, it's up in the air whether her family knows her situation. I mean, they certainly, I don't know that she's on drugs or something, though they might know something's going on with her, but you never see her family, but you do see them mentioned, and she says she's going to visit them at some point, and that kind of goes wrong. But I mean, again, the movie starts with her kind of not alone, but just kind of with nobody else, just kind of on this crowded subway, experiencing great pain from this probably practically back alley abortion she probably had, unfortunately. And she's just already just very low and stuff, and she somehow gets even lower. And I think it's just a matter of like, at some point, she probably got ashamed of talking with her parents and stuff, and she probably didn't have many friends in New York in the first place, and then she probably just got more and more lonely and isolated. And so again, like, it's easy for her maybe to get into somebody like Bobby, and then at least she has something, and I think she
Right.
doesn't want to lose that one thing that she has, because I think she's scared of being alone. Though honestly, I think at this point, just be with Raul Julia, who is in the movie. Raul Julia fans, he has two scenes in the
Yeah, he
movie,
is.
and is probably the most functioning drug guy in this movie. Though I don't know if it's really stated if he's on heroin or not.
Well, it's interesting to see how she relates to other characters in the movie besides Bobby, too. Like, she does try to kind of get in with his friends, and she, I think, makes a real effort, especially in the early days, to talk to them and, make conversation. And she gets excited when he's introducing her around. So she has that almost like teenager in love kind of love struck feeling, it seems, at the beginning. And I do think that's probably something that she was missing in her relationship with Raul Julia. I mean, we don't see a lot of comforting going on from him, even when he's, got her at his house and she's like curled up on the couch looking like she's going to pass out at any moment. So,
Yeah, but I think there's more support. There's somewhat of more of a support there, and I don't think he would. I think he again, I think has a certain Raul Julia's character. Again, he's barely in the movie, but he has, I think, a certain line to him, because again, he has kind of a function. He seems to be a somewhat successful artist and stuff, and it seems like he would at least be healthier for her than Bobby would be. I mean, they would struggle along, and maybe he wouldn't be the most nurturing or whatever, but I think he would maybe at least be better at keeping her from going into these more darker areas of crime and drugs.
the other thing I found interesting is how each of these characters gets a turn to be the one that's straight and not on drugs. And, when they are fully sober, they're much more likable for the most part when they're not like, desperately looking for their next fix. But once they finally kind of kick it for a short time anyway, they get more romantic and they get more loving and they, want the other person to join them in their journey. But it's just a matter of time before the other person who is still using brings them back down and they get back into the same old cycle again. But I did like the way that it kind of flips perspectives from both Bobby and Helen as they kind of take their turns being sober or being under the influence.
Even with the kind of morally questionable stuff that they're doing and the unhealthy stuff that you're doing, I think even, at least for me, I still felt like, I wanted these characters to find, some more happiness and healthier ways of dealing with stuff. I mean, yes, Al Pacino is abusive to a certain extent in the movie in terms of his verbal abuse, and I think he does hit her a little in one scene in the movie. But I still would hope for, I hope that they, one, would just break up, but also,
Right.
but would find a way to take care of the drug problem, and she would find ways to have better self-esteem, find healthier friends. He would go to an anger management place and really find better ways to support himself than crime. But at the same time, you kind of understand his too, because he mentions when he was 9, he was already stealing stuff and doing
Yeah.
whatever. So you can, I mean, he doesn't make any, I think, mention of his parents or anything, but I mean, you can imagine they probably had probably nothing. I mean, who knows if he even knew his dad at all. So, it was probably the only way he knows how to survive is through stealing stuff and hawking it and stuff.
And we meet his brother, who looks like he's more put together, but he's definitely still got issues. And he also talks about how he's, robbing people and he's just better at getting away with it. But yeah, I mean, the whole family definitely seems to have its issues.
Was there anything in particular that you noticed, since again this is very early in his film career? Was there anything in particular that of note in Al Pacino's performance that you would maybe say is particularly different or maybe surprising when compared to his later stuff?
I don't know if it was surprising, because I have seen Cruising, which is another one it's 80s, but it's still early, and Dog Day Afternoon. So I've seen him play characters where he's younger and he has that charisma, even though maybe his character is going through something difficult. But I will say that I thought he was very effective as he seemed sweet even when he's doing the wrong things, like all the wrong things. He's still, aside from those bursts of anger that you mentioned, he does have a real sweetness to him, and it feels so genuine. And he just has this exuberance that you're like, if you could just like lay off the heroin, you would do so much better. Like why don't you want to be this part of your life? And you can see how some of the other addicts that he hangs around with are super like out of it and downtrodden all the time. But when he's not actively using, he just comes across as this guy who's like so full of life that I think he really underscores the tragedy of his character by infusing it with that that vivaciousness.
How did you know I was here?
I know a guy down the hall in one of the rooms, and he told me. He said there's this terrific-looking chick in room 424, so I thought I'd come in and take a look.
Hey, how'd you get in here?
I got my ways. What are you gonna do? And where are you gonna go?
I'm gonna go home.
Oh? Where's home?
Fort Wayne.
Illinois. I did time there.
No, it's Indiana.
Indiana?
Mm-hmm.
I did time there too, I think. Indiana. Did time all over.
Yeah, and I get that, and it would be something I might follow up a bit more on when we get into Scarecrow. But yeah, there was certainly an energy and charisma about him that I think is maybe not necessarily lacking in his later films, but is certainly different in his later films. And there is a good person somewhere in there that could be pretty, good and supporting and stuff. If again, he got off the drugs and found better ways of dealing with his emotions and stuff. And it's one of the sad things, even with this person who's not really a great person on paper. You see a potential of him being so much better, and you kind of want him to be that.
No, it's definitely one of these movies that by the time it's over, there's really no like good way for this movie to end or for these two characters' story to end, because that they're just going to kind of fall back into this cycle again.
Yeah.
But I did like the way that the movie ends. I thought it was active.
No, I mean, those endings don't always work for me, but I do really like, the ending. It's probably one of my favorite parts of the movie is that what it's doing, because it does, without saying what it is, but like you said, it kind of indicates that they're going to kind of keep going through this cycle and stuff. And it does make you think, though, I mean, will they ever, I mean, I think that's one thing if I were to talk to Al Pacino, I would actually ask him, have you ever thought about what happened to Bobby eventually? Did he die of a drug overdose eventually? Did he just get, you see him in and out of jail throughout the movie. Does he eventually just do something bad enough that he's just stuck in jail for most of the rest of his life? Does he ever clean up or something? It'd be I think it's interesting to think about that. Do they ever actually find salvation? Because sometimes people do. I mean, there are drug addicts from the 1970s who managed to find a way out of it and stuff, but we don't know if that's going to be true for these people, or if there's even really the tools for that, because again, they don't really have the money for it. I mean, Kitty might have a hope just because her family seems like it's stable, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
eventually they can get her out of that. But I mean, Al Pacino, I mean, he's the only family we see, like you said, he's his older brother is into drugs, though I think manages it a bit better than Bobby does. But otherwise, he's dealing with disreputable people, and all the rest of Bobby's friends are just also into drugs and not healthy. So he really doesn't have the environment or the money or really, he would maybe it would have to be Kitty who eventually, if she gets clean, would have to push him into being that, because I don't see how else he would get there really.
Yeah, I would love to think that they managed to beat it and walk away from it all. That would be the ultimate happy ending for these two, but it's hard to say where the movie leaves us.
Okay, so our next film is going to be Scarecrow from 1973. Again, starring Al Pacino, co-starring with the great Gene Hackman. Al Pacino stars as a man who eventually is nicknamed Lion by Gene Hackman's character Max. The two initially form, at least on Gene Hackman's side, a reluctant friendship slash partnership as they kind of meet along the road as they're hitchhiking. And eventually, Gene Hackman, even though he's Max, his character says,
I gotta tell you something about me. I'm about the meanest son of a bitch alive, you know what I mean?
Yeah?
I don't trust anybody. I don't love anybody. And I can tear the ass out of a goddamn elephant, too.
decides to make Lion his partner in a car wash business that he hopes to open up in, I think, Pittsburgh. And it's something he's been wanting to do for a long time. He's been saving up money as he's been in prison for reasons I don't think are ever revealed. And Al Pacino is freshly out of the Navy. And it's a road movie as they kind of make various stops along the way, trying to support themselves. Eventually, they go and meet up with Gene Hackman's sister and a lady friend of her, and a lady friend or friend of hers that becomes a lady friend of Gene Hackman. And they also makes a stop in, I think it's Detroit, because Al Pacino is carrying this present for his child. He doesn't know the sex of the child, but he knows he has a child, and that's partially the reason why I think he ran away to the Navy. He's been supporting the child through at least a lump sum payment, but hasn't seen the child and wants to kind of reconnect and hopefully maybe be in that child's life. But along the way, again, they're just trying to get to Pittsburgh so they can open this car wash business. This film, again, directed by the same guy, but I think it's good to highlight this film because, I mean, Panic Needle Park, like I mentioned, is mentioned a little bit in Al Pacino's filmography. This film is really not mentioned that much at all in Al Pacino or Gene Hackman's filmography, even though I think, according to the internet, so take this with a grain of salt, I think Gene Hackman said this is one of his favorite, if not his favorite movie, his performances that he did, and movies that he did, and I think it's one of Al Pacino's favorites as well. And I think the fact that it did not do terribly well led to Gene Hackman deciding to basically just do commercial successful stuff after that, which is a bit of a shame. But anyway, I think it's a shame that it's not highlighted as much as it is. But it was interesting going into this because I purposely kind of stayed away from what it was about, and I kind of went into it blind. Did you know anything about this film before you watched it?
I just knew that it had Gene Hackman and Al Pacino. I knew nothing else. So I was both delighted and surprised by what was in store. I fell in love with this movie. I loved it within the first probably 10 minutes, and I continued to grow that love over the rest of the runtime of this movie. And I went back and forth of which character I loved more, Al or Francis, aka, or I should say Max or Francis, aka Lion, because Max decides that Francis is no kind of name, so he wants to call him something else, and his middle name is Lionel, so he calls him Lion. I loved their character dynamic. I loved how you get to see both of them kind of evolve and open up, and it's so rare to see a movie that's this genuine and gentle, and just kind of about a friendship between two men, like that doesn't have any weird undercurrents or sexual tension or romantic rivalry. It's just like these two guys who learn to care for each other, and I thought that was very sweet and very compelling.
Well, and I mean, it should be mentioned too. I think this is the only time that Al Pacino and Gene Hackman did a movie together. I want to say I think there was rumors that they didn't get along very well, though. I think that is just rumors. But I mean, the fact that you have these two kind of heavyweights. I mean, Gene Hackman obviously had done a bit more film work up to this point, and Al Pacino was still. I mean, I think he did this. I think this came out between The Godfather and Serpico, I think. So he was certainly growing as a name, but it was just to see these two people together and bouncing off each other was really interesting. And kind of going off a point I think we talked about for Panic in Needle Park in terms of Al Pacino's charisma, it was interesting to see him, and it's kind of maybe not terribly surprising if you know Al Pacino's very early origins, where he's almost the comic relief in this movie. Almost, he's very happy and upbeat, and he makes jokes. I mean, this whole thing about the Scarecrow, the name of the movie, comes from the fact that Gene Hackman has this very abrasive attitude about him, and if he runs into a problem, he's more likely just to fight his way out of it and stuff, and he's very angry all the time. While Al Pacino's character is very much of, no, I just make people laugh, because that's what scarecrows do. It makes this whole story about...
The farmer puts out a scarecrow, right, with a funny hat on it, got a funny face. Crows fly by, they see that, strikes them funny, makes them laugh.
The goddamn crows are laughing.
That's right, they're laughing their asses off. And then they say, well, that old Farmer Jones down there, he's a pretty good guy. He made us laugh, so we won't bother him anymore.
The goddamn crows are laughing.
Oh, they laugh.
And so that's what he does. He just tries to make people laugh and diffuses situations that way. And to see that lighter side of Al Pacino is very interesting. And it's just genuinely, like, some funny moments with him. There was one... And you see this a little bit in Panic in Needle Park, where he does a little bit of a jokey thing when Helen was recovering from her abortion in the hospital. He does this little faux dance with the nurse in the hospital. But anyway, in Scarecrow, though, there's one point where Gene Hackman is trying to get friendly, let's say, in this conversation with this pretty woman that his sister knows. They're outside his sister's house, and they're just trying to. He's trying to get to know this person so he can get in the sack with her and stuff. And they're working on something, and he kind of just tries to get rid of Al Pacino, like, hey, go move that fridge or whatever. And Lion is like, what do you mean move the fridge? Yeah, just go move the fridge. Just go over there and move the fridge. And he just eventually, has to, like, be told, like, multiple times just go do it. And then while he's doing that, he's making so much noise trying to do it. And then at one point, I think he just, like, falls over in this very comic fashion. And it's genuinely funny. And it's almost kind of sad in a way, though, but hasn't done more, like, good, like, comedic stuff. Not that this is a comedy, really, but there's certainly funny moments in it. And it was just, it was great to see that lighter side to him. And probably... I've seen far from all of his stuff, but I think this is the only Al Pacino movie that I know of or have seen where I don't think he yells at all in the movie.
Yeah, I think you are correct. I don't think he does either.
And this is like his most soft-spoken film I've ever seen, except for, I guess he doesn't yell in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but he has a small part in that, so I don't really count that. He's really a cameo in that, really.
Yeah, this movie really did make me wish that Al Pacino did a lot more comedies, because he is so gifted as both a physical comedian and just his comic timing. He knows how to get laughs out of people in this movie, like whether it's, characters that are antagonizing them or if it's Gene Hackman himself. And so I just loved seeing that side of him, because you're right, it's not a side we get to see very often. And it's so playful, and it's so, like, childlike at times, just to see, him scampering around, doing all these antics, being silly and saying silly things to try to get a rise out of people. He feels like somebody that you could imagine would be so much fun to be around. Mm-hmm. And I loved that character a lot.
Yeah.
And it was so fun, of course, to see Gene Hackman, because he's a delight no matter what. And I feel like this character, even though we've seen Hackman kind of play variations of like the gruff guy that has sort of a winning side to him, I still feel like this character had so many nuances and eccentricities and things that really made him unique. Like the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that this guy wears so many layers of clothing. It is just so ridiculous. I started laughing on layer 3, and there were like 10 more layers for him to
I
pull.
counted because when he first does that, and then Al Pacino comments on it, basically asking why he wears so many layers, and Hackman just says, "Oh, I don't like to be cold." So I think he wears, not counting his coat and not counting the pajamas, the pajama things he has under his clothes. I think it's 8 or 9 layers of clothing, shirts and jackets and sweaters and long sleeve this and short sleeve that, and this Hawaiian shirt and all the stuff. And like you said, he just keeps taking it off and taking it off and taking it off. And that kind of comes into play later in the film where he does something kind of funny and kind of plays on that kind of idea, which is really funny.
Yeah, that was a great scene. But yeah, that and also, the fact that he, after a fight, he says he has to take a nap, which I love that too. Just like that little element of like they both kind of have childlike tendencies, where one is like the class clown and the other is like the class bully. But eventually, you almost find them like swapping identities towards the end, which I found really interesting.
Somewhat. I think Gene Hackman more swaps identities than Al Pacino's character does. I think Al Pacino does start to get more pessimistic after a certain kind of detour that happens partway through the movie for like 15-20 minutes. There's some dark stuff that happens there, I think. But even then, I think until something happens very near the end of the film, I think there's still an element of he's been hurt, obviously, but I think there's still a level of optimism that he's retained until something very, very traumatic happens to him near the end.
I love how he carries the present around with him too. I felt like that was sort of the symbol of hope that he was carrying along, that like, no, he hasn't called his wife. No, he hasn't really made contact other than like sending money for years, but he's still like, okay, I got this present. It's wrapped up. I'm keeping it nice. We're going to stop in Detroit. We're going to give it to the kid. I'm going to, make my peace with everything. And that says so much about his character that A, he thinks that could possibly go well, but also B, that he's, he really does care and wants to make amends for his past wrongs.
I know people have drawn parallels between this and Of Mice and Men, which I think is...
I thought about that too a little bit, although they're both perfectly of sound mind in this movie, but...
No, but I think in terms of, again, the best laid plans of Mice and Men often go awry, where they have these plans that don't really quite work out, and, I mean, spoiler alert, the car wash is kind of a MacGuffin in the movie. Sure. But it's kind of like the whatever it is in the Of Mice and Men, the farm or whatever, and the rabbits thing. They have this great dream of what they're gonna do and stuff, and they can't quite get there, unfortunately.
Yeah, I definitely thought about that. I also thought about Midnight Cowboy just a little bit.
Yeah. I know people have talked about that too. Yeah,
dynamics there. But the movie that came to my mind first, and maybe this is just because I'm a huge Wes Anderson fan. The movie that came to mind first was Bottle Rocket, which also, of course, Gene Hackman is in. I don't know if you've seen Bottle Rocket, but
I've heard of it.
It's Wes Anderson's first movie, and it starts out with Luke and Owen Wilson. Luke is getting out of a mental institution, and his friend, played by Dignan, played by Owen Wilson, has this really extensive list of their, 5-year plan, 10-year plan, 15-year plan, and he's writing it all out in his notebook. And he has all these details, and he wants them to run through rehearsals of how to, rob these places, and he's constantly talking up Mr. Henry. And so anyway, there's all these little pieces, and I misspoke. It's not Gene Hackman that's in the movie. It's James Caan, but Gene Hackman would go on to be in Royal Tenenbaums, so he did work with Wes Anderson. But in my mind, I was making that connection of, okay, it's these two kind of misfit guys who are thrown together. One of them has these plans. The other one's sort of going along with the plans because he's got nothing better to do. And there's comedic elements, but there's also some drama there. So yeah, definitely some parallels. I would be shocked if Wes Anderson is not a fan of Scarecrow.
Is this a film that, again, it's something that's rarely talked about in terms of these actors and stuff, but is it something that you think should be more put out there when talking about other stuff too, The Godfather, French Connection, and all that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'll go out on a limb and say I like this way better than I like The French Connection. I might like it better than The Godfather. I know it's a smaller movie. I know.
I don't like this. Well, I don't like this more than The Godfather. I will say I liked it probably more than The French Connection. My wife and I watched that a few months ago, and sadly neither of us were terribly big fans of it.
I
But
like it, but I
yeah,
think it's been sort of reinvented so many times at this point that it's hard to be able to be in the mindset of like that first time that people watched it and how impressed I'm sure they were by the car chases, because now, we have all the Fast and Furious movies, and I'm sort of joking, but like, it's hard to like go back in time in your mind and be like, okay, if none of these crime movies existed, how would I feel about this one? Still a good movie, but
yeah. I get yeah.
so yeah, Scarecrow I instantly loved. 5 stars. I think it deserves a really royal treatment. Now I don't know, like I got my copy from the library, so it's just a regular DVD. It's nothing fancy. I don't know if there is like a specialty release of this. Are you aware?
There is a because my copy is the Warner Archive. They have released this on Blu-ray. Uh,
Okay, good.
yeah, so that's where I got my copy. So again, people who are curious, Twilight Time for Panic Needle Park. Otherwise, there's a DVD copy. I think that still goes around and stuff. But the best copy is from Twilight Time. You can find that on eBay. And as far as I know, Warner Archive is still selling their Blu-ray edition of Scarecrow. I think they also released a DVD edition, I would assume, as well. But yeah, both certainly available. I will say that I probably like Panic Needle Park better than this movie, because this movie I dug for the first 10 or 15 minutes, and while I didn't dislike the movie that came after that, I just felt, for me, at certain points, it kind of detoured in ways that I didn't like, and ultimately, I thought the movie was fine. I thought it was interesting, certainly, but I didn't, I guess I didn't have the love for it that you did, but,
Yeah, it sounds like we're opposites on this one, because like I said, at Panic at Needle Park, I know it's a good movie, but I can't imagine ever watching again, and for that reason, I rate that a little lower just in my own mind in terms of film preferences. Whereas this one, I want to watch it over and over. I want to show it to people. I want to like shout from the rooftops how good it is. So, yeah.
Well, I think, and one thing that I found interesting about this film, and people can correct me if I'm wrong. Again, I've seen far from all of Al Pacino's filmography, but this was the closest I had seen or had heard of Al Pacino playing a normal person.
Hmm.
Because he always, Panic Needle Park, he's a normal guy, but he's addicted to drugs. The Godfather, he's part of the mafia, or in other films he's playing a cop or detective or something, or he's Jimmy Hoffa, or he's playing an eccentric version of Al Pacino, or he's playing a lawyer or whatever the heck. So, or he's part of the American Revolution or whatever. Go on and on and on. I think, I would love at this point. I would genuinely love, or he's playing Richard III, or whatever. I would love to see him, even at this point in his career. I would love to see him play an almost boringly normal person.
Hmm.
Like, that isn't, he's not involved in anything weird. He's just, I don't know what it would be about. If it's going to be a romantic movie about him with somebody, or I don't know, or whatever. But just have him play a really terribly normal person, and I think he would do very well in it. It would be kind of a nice, I think, change of pace, even in this, especially at this point in his career, where he's always played this kind of, out there people.
Well, I was thinking watching this that I wished he had a version of like Meet the Parents that, Robert De Niro had, where he got to show that really comedic side. And I feel like there have been attempts, but I would love to see Al Pacino something that
Mm-hmm.
equivalent. And I got to talk about, before we stop talking about this film, I have to talk about the cinematographer,
Yes.
Vilmos Zsigmond, who I loved the cinematography in this movie. It's a road movie, so there's a lot of opportunities for cool, fun, shots and setups. And I thought that he did it really beautifully. And then looking at his filmography, I was like, well, yeah, of course he did, because this is the guy behind, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, The Long Goodbye, Deliverance, The Deer Hunter, Blowout, some other movies. So he's done a lot of gorgeous work. And if you enjoyed the visuals in those movies, and Close Encounters, lest I forget. So if you enjoyed the visuals in those movies, definitely check out Scarecrow, because it's an early example of the kind of work that he did.
Okay, so before we get into some new or upcoming releases from some of these boutique labels, I did want to mention it was last month in July as we record this. I was wondering, since we last talked, Rosalie, if you can remember, did you get anything else during the Criterion 50% off sale?
I did. I went up and picked up Deep Cover when that came out. So I don't think I picked that one up when we last talked, but I had to have it in my collection. It's a gorgeous Blu-ray, and it's a fantastic movie. So I grabbed that. and I was very restrained and didn't buy more besides that one.
And I don't remember if I got anything more. I think there might have been 3 other things that I got, but I can't remember what they were, and I'm too lazy to check. But I do know I did get, and I have posted about this because I was very enthusiastic. I did finally get the Before trilogy with Richard Linklater, Ethan Hawke,
Oh,
and
yeah.
Julie Delpy, and I watched. It was one of the few times I actually would have watched it the day I bought it, but there was something going on and I couldn't or whatever, and I decided not to. But I watched it like the day or two after that, the first one. And I don't know. Have you seen those movies?
I have. They're some of my favorite movies of all time, so I'm
Just
so excited.
yeah. Will be something we have to talk about at some point. Not now for reasons that maybe I'll talk to you privately about. But I watched the first 2. The first one I adored. I loved. I mean, I'm a bit of a romantic, and I loved the first one. Wrote a video piece on it, which if you're interested in that, check out my YouTube channel. And watched the second one a week or so. No, a little bit later, a couple weeks later. Have not watched the third one yet. I liked the second one, not as much as the first one. Have not watched the third one yet, partially because I've been very down lately, and partially because I'm always going to probably put off the third one to a certain extent because I know it's the most dramatic.
Yeah.
Or most potentially depressing of them all, and I don't know if I want to deal with that quite yet. So I don't know when I'm gonna watch it. I don't want to put it off too long because then it just becomes this ominous thing that I'm avoiding. But I think I don't know. I'm hoping it doesn't terribly depress me. But anyway, I loved the first one, and I mean to the extent where I don't really have like a favorite movie of all time. I have favorite movies. Because it's really hard for me to be like, oh, that movie I like. I have like a favorite TV show. I sort of have a favorite book, but it's really hard when there's so many different types of movies to say, oh, this one I like more than the other ones. I might actually list Before Sunrise as my favorite movie then, because
Wow. It
I
made a huge impression on you. That's
yeah,
cool.
I really adored it. There's really almost nothing I could complain about the movie. I loved it. But yes, absolutely adored it. Again, I'm sure we'll talk about it at some point or another. But we do have some some exciting news from Criterion. Criterion is officially, while these will not be out for a while. I don't think any of them will be out until
November.
November. But they are finally going to dip their toes into 4K releases. So they'll have DVDs, Blu-rays, and 4K releases of certain titles, or maybe all titles going forward. I don't know if it'll be everything or 4K will be just for certain stuff going forward. But anyway, there's, I believe, 5. A film called La Strada, which I know absolutely nothing about. It is Fellini. Shows how little I know of Fellini. And then a collection, Once Upon a Time in China, the complete films. A series of, I think it's 5 or 6 film starring Jet Li, mostly starring Jet Li. I think he's not in a couple of them. But then another film we talked about, I think we're both quite fond of, Mulholland Drive by David Lynch.
Yep.
Had a DVD and Blu-ray release before. They're re-releasing it with a 4K. And the next one, which I'll mention last, but then they are doing Menace to Society. That will be out as well. Besides Mulholland Drive, I don't know off the top of my head if any of these had been released by Criterion previously. But the biggest announcement, even though some might be a bit upset that this film is being released, considering how many times it has been released, Criterion, for the first time, I think, since they released it on Laserdisc forever ago, will be releasing Citizen Kane, which will be exciting. I might actually finally have to buy a copy of Citizen Kane. So that is very exciting. What did you think of this news, Rosalie?
I am super excited, and I do think it's fitting that Citizen Kane was the first 4K title that they announced, just because of that, going back to their very first Laserdisc, which was a brand new format for them, being Citizen Kane. And I love Kane. It's not my favorite movie or anything, but it's a movie that is super meaningful for cinephiles, and, I think, yes, it's been released before, but having the Criterion treatment just makes sense. And I'm not a 4K early adopter or anything like that. I think I have one 4K movie,
I don't think I have any.
but I just, I know that people who love quality cinema have been crying out for 4K for some time now from Criterion. So it's cool that they're getting into that, and I think it's going to be good for them. And I was, as a bonus, super excited about Menace to Society coming to Blu-ray because I love the Hughes brothers. I think they're awesome directors, and it's time that more of their movies made it onto Criterion.
Did you have some other stuff you wanted to highlight that are coming out or are out now?
I do. So the one that I wanted to talk about first is a movie I first saw at Noir City years ago, and it is this Argentinian film noir that had been lost, and they found it. Somebody found it in, it's one of these stories. It's found in a basement or found in an attic,
A
and they
janitor's closet.
exactly, and it was like in questionable condition, but they restored it. The Film Noir Foundation restored it, and now years later, this amazing film that I've been telling people about and like wishing I could show them is going to be available to purchase, and that's coming out from Flickr Alley. It's called The Bitter Stems, or Los Tallos Amargos, and it is phenomenal. It's one of my top 10 probably film noirs that I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot. So I'm going to be picking this up as soon as possible. I believe it comes out on November 2nd. So I've got a little time to wait, but definitely worth waiting for. I've waited this long, and I'm really excited for that one. And then keeping on the noir subject, Severin Films is releasing a 2-pack of 2 different titles that are Italian or Franco noir, and that is Rafifi in the City and Death Whistles the Blues. I have not seen these movies, but I am super curious about them. They're both from Jess Franco, and I'm super curious to see, what these movies are like. I've seen only one Jess Franco, and it was kind of softcore-y, so I don't think those are going to be like this.
Softcore, you say? What was the name of the movie
Yeah.
again?
It was some vampire thing.
Oh, okay. I'll
She
look
has
that
a
up.
lot of those. Yeah, I'm sure you could find it. But yeah, and if they are softcore, I won't complain because it's, it's noir.
Mhm.
So why not mix those two things? But yeah, I'm super curious about that one. That one is coming out in October. The last thing I'll mention is from Code Red from 1982. It's a movie called Trick or Treats, and it just looks like a fun, Halloween movie. This is the synopsis. A babysitter is stuck watching over a young brat on Halloween night who keeps playing vicious pranks on her. To add to her trouble, the boy's deranged father has escaped from an asylum and is planning on making a visit.
Dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun. I can't wait. I'm going to watch it. And David Carradine's in it, so that's just an extra bonus. So, in looking ahead to the next few things we're going to cover in the next episodes of the show, in September, we're going to be looking at the Criterion release of the golden age of television. And what this is essentially is something that was curated for PBS in the 80s. And basically, there are a number of different features on here that were made for TV. So we're going to be looking at the first 4 of the 8. And that includes Marty, Patterns, No Time for Sergeants, and A Wind from the South. So those are some that we can look forward to next time. Excited to dive into that.
And but important to know, early versions of those. So it's not the same version of Marty we talked about. It's probably not the version of No Time for Sergeants that you're thinking of, but early kind of live teleplay versions of those.
And then in October, we're going to be tackling foreign horror movies, and specifically European horror. So we're going to be talking about Eyes Without a Face, which is from France and was made in 1960. And then we'll flash forward to 10 years later with Dario Argento's Bird with the Crystal Plumage. So I am very excited to talk about those with you, Tim. I don't know if you've seen them, but I think they will give us lots to talk about. And then finally, in November, as we celebrate our 2-year anniversary of the show, we are going to be diving into the world of Twin Peaks. So in tribute to David Lynch, who we've talked about on this show before, and also 25 Years Later site, who is our host, we are excited to talk about the Twin Peaks movie Fire Walk with Me. And Tim and I are also going to be watching the show in preparation for it. Don't know how much we'll be spending time on the show, particularly the revival of the show that came much more recently, but we're going to dive into as much of the early stuff as we can to get us prepared for the movie. So we'll see how much comes up on the podcast. But I'm excited about that one too, as a David Lynch fan who has yet to tackle Twin Peaks.
Me too. So I'll be interested. I've been kind of avoiding Twin Peaks. I think I've mentioned that I'm usually adverse to weird things, so hopefully I enjoy this, and because there's not a lot of Twin Peaks out there, but if I end up not liking it, it'll be a slog, so hopefully all goes well.
Well, hey, you made it through Eraserhead. I feel like this is not going to be as weird as that.
Yes, but that was one, hour and 40-minute film. This is multiple episodes and a feature-length film, so we'll see how this goes. But it does have A lot of actors I like in it.
Yes,
So
it does.
anyway.
It's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to those conversations, and we're looking forward to having all of you listen in.
But in the meantime, you can find me on Twitter at CinemaPackRats, where you can also find links to my YouTube channel.
And you can find me on Twitter at Rosalie Lewis and on fthismovie.net or .com, whichever you prefer to type in. I am on their podcast occasionally, and I write articles every now and again.
And you can also find our parent site 25 Years Later at their website, 25yearslatersite.com, or their Twitter account at 25YL But I think until next month, we will catch you guys later.